Hello again, and thank you for joining us as we look into the events of 1841 through the eyes of a Victorian teenager, Marianne Nicholson, the mother of Gwendolen Gascoigne of Loverton Hall.
January, Wednesday, 6th. Letters from William today. The first we have had from Sydney, dated 19th August, written a week after his arrival there. He had spent a month exceedingly pleasantly in Van Diemen's Island with Uncle Fred and other friends. Everyone was exceedingly hospitable, and he met several old faces at the very first outset. Among others, Dr. Nasio and a son of General Casey's, who's in the 51st.
So, who was William?
William is Marianne's older brother by 5 years. He would be nearly 24, as his birthday is the 25th of January. We meet him having just arrived in Australia, Sydney, from Hobart Town via Norfolk Plains in Van Diemen's Land. William enlisted as an ensign in 1836, having not gone to Cambridge. He was first garrisoned in Ireland, and from there William, now a lieutenant, joined his regiment, the 96th Foot, or the Manchester Regiment, and his job was to guard the convicts while taking passage to Van Diemen's Land to be part of the colonial land forces of Australia, along, as we heard, with Michael Casey of the 51st and Captain Richmond, whose task was to defend the Empire's colonies of Australia, Tasmania and New Zealand.
This week with Uncle Fred was delightful for all parties, and he gives a very flourishing account of our birth cousins. Uncle Fred had just got the appointment of Postmaster General to the island and is in high spirits of his most unexpected good fortune, coming after such repeated disappointments. He now hurries from Norfolk Plains to Hobart Town, and there we hope William may in time be sent on detachment from Sydney. He says that the accounts of the latter place are most unfavourable, and that even Norfolk Island is preferable. There all the officers of the 96th are stationed. William hopes soon to get a mounted police appointment in Sydney. The work is very hard, but the pay is very good. 6 pence a day extra and forage for 2 horses. Captain Richmond and the Maitland had arrived before William left Hobart Town, so that his box and all his letters were in readiness to receive him. Mr. Mallison came.
So, what was the voyage that William, Marianne's brother, had been on? And where was it that he landed?
The Mandarin, the ship, sailed from Spithead in Portsmouth on the 25th of February 1840, and it arrived first in Van Diemen's Land on the 30th of June 1840, after a journey of 12,000 nautical miles, which took 126 days.
Wow.
The convicts would have been disembarked at the penal colony called Port Arthur on the Tasmanian Peninsula, which was about 60 miles south of Hobart. Van Diemen's Land, of course, is now called Tasmania, and it's the only island state of Australia, and it's located 156 miles off the southeast corner. It's a long way if you're a convict to try and get to anywhere but Tasmania.
Yeah.
The population is now about 500,000, and it's set in 26,000 square miles, which actually, if you can imagine the size of the Republic of Ireland, it's the same size, and 500,000 people is the same size as the population of Cornwall, which is quite sparse. But if you think back in 1840, when it's been landed, the population was 45,000 in a country the size of Ireland.
Wow.
That's a long distance if you're drawn to try and run away. However, Tasmania wasn't empty when the British arrived. It was inhabited and had been inhabited for probably 35,000 years by the Tasmanian Aborigine population, which when the English first came was about 5,000. There was huge resistance to the invasion of these white people, and so the British used military and local militia, and they were employed to displace the Aborigines either into captivity on nearby island, and Norfolk Island was one of those, or if they stayed, they were persecuted. If they fought back, of course, then they would be punished and probably killed. There's a really good programme called The Australian Wars on BBC iPlayer, and The Black Wars, which is the Tasmanian ones, is given quite a lot of coverage, and it's terrible. It is worth a watch. And of course, there's always the European diseases that people bring, and that basically eradicated the population.
So, Kathy, it must have been a horrendous journey. So, could you tell me some more about the journey, and why were there convicts aboard?
Well, the ship, the Mandarin, was quite small for the size of fleet that was used to transport convicts over to Australia. The ship was captained by a James Muddle, and he would have had only about 10 men to crew the ship, which had 3 sails. Plus there was guards for the convicts and a ship's doctor. Obviously people got unwell. On some of the larger ships, such as the Maitland we hear Marianne talk about.
Oh, is that the one that Captain Richmond was on, that she mentioned?
Correct. He was using just as a passenger to get over there. And in fact, he took his sister, because on the passenger list, his sister's named. In fact, 10 other people went on the Maitland to go to Australia. On the Mandarin, however, there were 112 male convicts. 7 we know came from the York Quarter Sessions, and there was a John Ingram who's noted as being from Leeds. Sadly, Thomas Duke died on the voyage, but another 13 died within the first 18 months within the penal colony.
So it was almost like a sentence to death anyway. I mean, you had to get over there.
Yes.
You know,
yes. I mean, one death is really quite small. If you look at, there was lots and lots of ships going over there. There'd be, if there was an outbreak of a disease, there could be 20, 30, 40 deaths. Penal transportation has been used, which is what these convict ships were, since the 5th century, so it wasn't anything new, and it was often seen in countries as more merciful than the death penalty. It is, in fact, just forced labour, and it's been used in the 18th and 19th century as a method of colonisation. It also alleviated the pressures at home if too many people were unemployed and were living on the streets and committing petty crime. It was a way to get rid of undesirables. From 1614 to 1775, the British convicts and the Irish people who were forced into labour went to the colony of North America and the West Indies. But the American Revolution of 1776 meant that transportation was no longer possible to those countries. So the solution was for the population to be transplanted to another foreign land, that being modern-day Australia, specifically New South Wales and Van Diemen's Land, Tasmania. The first fleet that went to Australia was in 1787, and that was a convoy of 11 ships. Those people now, if you go on the Australian website, several of them are tracing the descendants from those, as they are seen as the founding fathers of the white population.
Oh, wow, like America.
Indeed, like in America, you can get the founding fathers or the daughters of the revolution. It is that sort of historical database that people want to buy into to see where they came from. And
wow.
Increasingly during the 19th century, criminals sentenced to death had their sentence reduced to transportation. However, that was not an easy way of living anyhow. When they arrived, they would be assigned a master who would then monitor their work and behaviour, and they provided appropriate accommodation at their place of labour. So they'd go either to a small manufacturing, if they were manufacturing anything, or mostly to agriculture. They were worked very hard and for no money. That's the point. They couldn't escape. They were never given any money.
So they had no means of providing for themselves?
No, they couldn't. And given it's a small island, it's not very well populated, you're not going to be able to steal your way out, even if you got free, and then you're 170 miles off the coast of Australia.
Wow.
I don't think you're going to swim that far. You're pretty much stuck on that island. Transportees could gain a limited amount of freedom through a ticket to leave, which gave them a small amount of money. Or, if their good behaviour was that good, they could also gain a conditional pardon if they'd been excellent and served 7 years of 14 years without any bad behaviour being reported.
So, was there any way they could return to their home country, or?
If you could attain a full pardon, you could go back, but of course then you had to work long enough and hard enough, being an ex-convict, to get enough money to get yourself back to England.
Right, wow. So almost impossible.
Mostly impossible, yes.
So, what sorts of people got transported to Australia? Who were these people?
Those being transported had been found guilty of a range of offences, from attempted theft of a handkerchief to manslaughter.
Wow. So there's quite a difference.
There was quite a range. The sentences were normally 7, 10, 14, 15 or 24 years. And I have no idea why those specific terms were transported, but they were. On this ship, the Mandarin, there was also 32 convicts who were on board with life sentences. That meant even if you served a term or you got a pardon, you still couldn't go back to England.
Wow.
One prisoner, a William Thomas, who was only 16, from Cornwall, was transported for stealing a chain and pitchfork. He was sentenced to 7 years. He was described in the details that went with him to Australia as a notorious criminal. This is a 16-year-old. Because he'd previously stolen when he was 10 and had tried to steal and been whipped already for trying to steal a round of cheese when he was 14.
Wow, so it was like you were criminalised for trying to survive, really.
Yes, because William was the oldest child in the family and his father had already died.
So they didn't take any of that into consideration. You were a criminal and that was it.
That was it. Yes, simple. Also on board this ship, and probably the most famous people to be deported from England, were John Frost, Zephaniah Williams, and William Jones, and they were known as the Welsh Chartist martyrs from the Newport Uprising or the Newport Revolution.
So they were martyrs, not in a religious sense, but in a economic sense.
Yes, they were in fact sentenced to death, but the public outcry made the judge commute it, if that's the transportation you could say, but it was commuted to transportation, or they would have served.
Wow.
In fact, the interesting thing is they were the last 3 men in Britain to be sentenced to be hanged, drawn and quartered.
Oh, God.
So it was a horrendous death, and that was really the public outcry.
Yeah.
That hadn't been used for a lot of years, but they decided these people so threatened the society,
the
at the
establishment.
time. Indeed. So the public made them be transported as a respite from that horrific death. John Frost is probably the most famous one. He had been a prosperous draper in Bristol, in London. He owned his own shop in Newport. When he got married, his wife inherited some money, and he then fell foul because her cousin, Thomas Prothero, actually said he shouldn't inherit the money, and there was a bit of a standoff between these two men. However, Prothero was more influential in the Tory party, as it was then. He was sentenced for defaming him for a short term, but when he was released, his general influence and standing in society overtook, and he was still able to become mayor of the town. And in fact, he was a magistrate. His association with the Chartist movement began quite late on of the Chartist movement in 1838, and he was elected a delegate to the Chartist Convention. The minute that became apparent, the Home Secretary of Britain then took his magistracy away from him, so he's no longer a magistrate.
Because the Chartists were seen as against the government.
They were, yes, they were definitely asking for what wouldn't now seem to be terrible things. In fact, I can read you a very quick list that all they were asking for were the vote for men, not women, over the age of 21, a secret ballot, so you couldn't be persecuted for voting one way or another, no property qualifications for being an MP, so you didn't have to own your own home, or certainly you didn't have to have an estate and land, payments for MPs, because of course if you're a landed gentry you could afford to do it, and if you're a working man you could not, and electoral districts of equal size, which in fact we're going through this year when they've rejigged the boundaries to make them more of equal size. The only demand they wanted that is now not on statute is for annual elections of Parliament.
Right. Wow. So really everything they got sent to Australia for and persecuted for is what we've actually got now.
Yes,
it was sensible.
Seems quite reasonable, doesn't it? John Frost was lucky. In fact, he was pardoned, and he got back first to America, and then he came to England, and he lived till 93. So there was a good ending for him.
Yeah.
Williams and Jones actually stayed there, and they became quite prosperous as well. Their fame sort of helped them in the end.
They were obviously clever men, because to actually see and stand up for what's right, you have to be clever.
Yes.
You know, even when it's not to your own advantage, you do what's right because it's right.
Yes, they're sort of heroes, aren't they? They stood up for principles and helped people who were not able to do that.
Yeah. So. Well, that's fascinating.